Now, what we'll do is we'll take a quick look at some of the various portfolio management matrices that exist. And so again, we're looking at a corporation that has a series of business units, and we're trying to manage this collection of business units as best as possible. Where do we invest our money? Where do we divest certain business units? Where do we grow? Where do we stop growing? How do we do it? And we're going to look at two particular matrices that have been developed over time that help corporations manage their BU strategies. Well, the first thing we got to do is get our hands around what we mean by a portfolio. And I guess the simplest way I can tell you to do that is to look at yourselves. Okay? There's an old rule in portfolio management. If you're investing in stocks and savings accounts and whatnot, is, well, you know what? You should have, if you're a young person, a large percent of your investment in stocks. They're high risk, they're high return, but you're going to hold them for a long period of time, so go for it. So if you're 20 years old, the rule of thumb is you take 100, you subtract your age, and that remainder, which in this case would be 80% should be invested in stocks if you're 20 years old, and the rest maybe in low risk savings account or stuff like that. So the first question we have in any matrix that we're going to be using, we're creating, is going to help us define this balance. What's the balance we want? Is it, in this case, 80-20, 50-50? What type of balance do we want to have in our portfolio of businesses? The second would be the attractiveness. How attractive are the different businesses in the portfolio? It helps us define attractiveness. So here, if I've defined my 80% and 20%, now I'm going to ask specifically, well, is Corporation 1 attractive? Is Corporation 2 attractive as an investment in my portfolio? Are they doing a good job? And finally, we'll ask, how well do we all fit together? The first matrix I want to show you is the Boston Consulting Group's matrix, and it's basically helping us balance and determine attractiveness of the portfolio. So what is attractive in each of the business units, and is my business portfolio effectively balanced? And this matrix is defined on two key axes. That of market share, so what share of the market does this company have, and is the market that the company is in growing or not? So high and low growth and high and low market share. So let's go around this, and you probably may have heard of these different roles before. The first are stars. These are companies, business units in the corporation that are in a high market share and in a high growth industry. So my market is growing, there's a lot of money to be made, and my market share is really high. These are great business units. There's a lot of benefits to be made, but to grow with the market and to grab that market share, we have to continue to invest in these stars. If we don't invest in them, they won't continue to grow with the market, and they won't be able to maintain their market share. Now, the stars should be able to create, hopefully, the benefits that they need to be self-sufficient. But we have to make sure that we continue to invest. We don't let these stars die. The second group of BUs would be in what we'll call question marks. These are companies that are sitting out there. They're in a high market growth industry, but for the moment, their market share is very low. Now, we could hopefully make some of these business units over here that have low market share in a high growth market into stars. We can move them over to this category over here, but that will require investment. Okay, and a lot of these question marks, and we can see they're low performers in a high growth market. Some of them may not work. Some of these are not good investments. So we usually end up financing many and investing in many question marks, knowing that some of them will fail. but some will succeed. So we want to move them over here. We're going to identify our question marks and invest in a series of them, knowing that, well, some will succeed in becoming stars. Next, we've got our cash cows. So cash cows are companies and organizations that are in have a high market share. So they have a significant market share of revenue, but are in a low growth market. So we basically, and this is probably what's happened, is that we had a star company. It has a high market share, and the growth is very high. They developed a brand. People like their product. The market growth decreased, so the market started to slow down. And because they've got this brand value here, well, the existing clients, the clients that are still in this mature market now, stick with this company. So it's a mature market. I've got a brand that works, and I can beat all of the other competitors. This is a really nice position to be in. It was probably a past star. The market is probably mature. And now I'm just making a lot of money because I'm the preferred provider, if you will, in a mature market. I don't need to make investments in this cash cow. Okay, it's there. The market's not growing. I don't have to catch up. I've established my position. I just got to make sure I don't lose that position. So there's some investments to be made, but not huge. And there are high profits here. Okay, so this is a real cash cow. And lastly, we've got the dogs. The dogs are businesses that have a low market share, and maybe in a mature or declining industry or market. So this is, if I want to invest, if I invest money in this, it's just a cash drain. I mean, this is going to cost me money. The market is very low, maybe dying market. The market share is very low. I'm a small player. This is just costing me money. And the strategy here is, well, do I divest? Do I close? And again, it's a tough question because there may be links between these. This dog may be providing something to a star over here or to the cash cow. So it's not a simple divest or not decision. You've got to look into this. Now, other issues we have to consider when we look at the BCG matrix are, well, one, the cash cow should not hoard their profits. This company over here, my cash cow, wow, they're making high profits. And if we just keep the profits here, we're not benefiting from the profits to finance stars, to finance potential question marks to move into stars. So we can't have them hoarding their profits there. They don't make sense keeping all the profit there. The profit has to be used elsewhere. They don't need that much money to invest and to grow. It's a declining market or a mature market. Market share, when you build this matrix, market share depends on how you define the market. And you may have business units that want to overstate their market share, because market share is defined on depends on how you define the market, how you define your product and your service. So be very careful on how business units define market share. Make sure it's defined consistently across your different business units. Another criticism that comes up about this is that, okay, we're using our cash cows here to finance our question marks and our stars, to create new stars, to make sure the stars grow. Well, yeah, okay, but you know what? External capital markets exist, and do I need, all this cash cow and all this money when I can just go out to the marketplace and find an external investor, especially when, I'm in a high growth, high market share? I can go to a financial investor and say, hey, can you help me out? And they'll probably say, yeah, we can get the money for you. Be careful with animals. Okay, so here we've got cows and dogs, right? The motivation for employees in these cows and dogs can be really low. Imagine you're working for a cash cow. You're making a lot of profit. You're proud of your company. It's a leading company. You're making high profits, but at the same time, the company's not investing in your activity or investing just the minimal amount. So you're wondering, what am I doing wrong? We're making all this money. What's happening? The company's not investing in our activities. We don't have new offices. We feel like we're forgotten. And beyond that, some of our profits are maybe being used to help other companies. Dogs, same thing. You don't pay attention to them. You think they're always thinking, well, are we going to be around the next day? So cows may become dogs if you don't pay attention to them. These cash cows over here feel like they're doing really good work, but nobody really cares about them because there's no investment going on. And if they start losing motivation, boom, they're going to lose market share because they're not paying attention and they're not engaged. And lastly, as I mentioned, watch your dogs. You may want to keep your dogs alive because they have links to other parts of your matrix. The second matrix is called the GE McKinsey matrix. And this is a very interesting matrix because it helps us evaluate the business potential for each component of our portfolio. Do we continue to invest? Do we invest in a company or in a business? Yes or no? This was developed by McKinsey, which is a consulting organization for General Electric in the 1970s. And it's trying to answer a basic problem that any company has, is that resources, capital resources for investment are rare. And so the question is, well, where do we put our efforts? In which SBU, which strategic business unit do we need to invest? So the McKinsey matrix basically looks at two dimensions, just like the BCG matrix. We're going to look at the competitive strength of each strategic business unit relative to its rivals. So we want to know their market share, brand loyalty, loyalty of customers. Are they meeting the critical success factors of the market? How competitive are they relative to their competitors? And this is probably the most challenging part of doing or completing the McKinsey matrix, and we won't go into it here, is building an assessment of all of this stuff here. And usually we use weighted matrices where you go out and assess each business unit and come up with a ranking or a measure. And that's a challenge in and of itself. The second part of the McKinsey matrix is the long-term attractiveness of the market. And this is, we spoke about attractiveness of markets and industries with Porter's 5 forces, for example. And we asked ourselves, well, is it an attractive market to be in or not? So this is dependent upon market size, the growth of the market in the future, the trends in profitability, etc., etc., etc. So in this space where we have competitive strength of the SBU relative to rivals and market attractiveness, we can look at 3 large areas. First large area are organizations or strategic business units that are in this grow area. They're priority areas for investment where we've got high market long-term attractiveness and high SBU competitive strength. These things are, they're very competitive, they're very strong, they're meeting the competitive needs of their companies, they're competing well, they have high market share, and the market is growing, which is great. The second group of companies would be maybe down on the right-hand bottom corner, where the long-term attractiveness of the sector is low. So it may be an industry in a market that, hey, this doesn't look that great. Maybe we shouldn't be here anymore. And we have business units that, don't have competitive strength relative to their rivals. So we may want to be focusing on harvesting these things or investing just enough to keep them operating or maybe get rid of them. And lastly, we've got companies that are in holding pattern, where we're neither up on the left or neither on the right. We can invest in them and get them to maybe become more competitive and get into the green region. But we want to focus primarily on the grow components of our portfolio. And when we do this, we come up with these 9 boxes. And these are the 9 boxes that basically we try to position our companies in, our business units, pardon me, when we do this assessment. So let's say we've got a situation like this. We've got 4 business units, and each of these circles represents, the size of the circle represents the market potential, and the size of the pie here, the blue part, represents my market share. So here I've got 2 big markets. This is the size of the market, and this is my market share. So here I've got a pretty good market share here. Here I've got about 25%. Here I've got 2 other business units. This one is a small market, and I've got a small market share. And this one, I've got a small market or medium-sized market, and I've got about a 50% market share, which is pretty good. And the question is, what do you do? What do you do with these businesses? Well, obviously here things are very well. I'm going to continue probably to invest in this company. It's in a large market. I've got a good market share. This merits good growth. Here I've got a company that's in a large market. I've got a small, relatively small market share relative to this one. I may want to say, hey, look, let's invest and let's pull this into this green zone here. Let's make it more competitive to take advantage of this long-term attractiveness. So we want to move it maybe over here, invest, and grow the market share here, because we're going to increase its competitive strength. Here I've got a business that's doing pretty well. I've got a good market share. The long-term attractiveness is medium, so I'll do the minimum probably necessary. Here is a good candidate for divestment, unless, as I said before, we have some potential links. We have links between our high performers and high growth market, high competitive strength. But does it depend on somehow maybe a small company making a small market share? Does it depend on this company here? And so if we jettison this company down here, if we divest it, we're going to impact one of our probably most important businesses that we've got. So we can be really, 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 really careful. Here are basic strategies you've got. If you've positioned your different businesses, obviously if we're up here, we're going to invest to protect our position. We can't give it up. Here we're going to invest to build. Here we had a company that was here in our example. We saw there was a potential there, so we're going to move it over here to build it, move it off to the left. We had an example here where we're going to maintain it to keep the earnings going. And obviously, these are questions about potential divestment down over here. So if you have any questions on these matrices, on parenting, please feel free to send them my way, and I look forward to reading them, and I look forward to hearing from you. And we'll move into the final video, which looks at acquisitions and alliances.